Greetings, class. This is Professor Palmeno, and I would like to welcome you to our first lecture on advertisements. So advertisements are what we're going to discuss for this lecture today for this week. And we're going to go into the details on how advertisements affect people's lives and, how advertisements, catch you in, link you to a product of any sort, and how this has an overall outcome on the way you decide to live your life and the choices that you make. So this is to accompany the readings that you have for this class. And while it's not a summary of the readings, it's more of a critical in-depth look using analytical strategies in order for you to understand how to write a better analysis and also how to critically think for yourself. All right, so let's begin. So first off, we're going to look at inferences. And what are inferences really? So when we come to the understanding of inferences, we are looking at an educated guess. So an inference in itself is an educated guess. It allows an individual to come to a conclusion based on a set of information. So you could see a person eating a pizza and you could say, wow, that person likes pizza. Or maybe that person is eating one slice of pizza and say, well, they can only afford a slice. They allow an individual to look at an event or a situation and have that individual come to a conclusion based off of that information. So in a case, it's an educated guess. If you don't know all of the information, you're looking at something, you're like, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So as with everything, there are good inferences and there are bad ones. So we want to take a look at some of the characteristics of good inferences versus bad inferences. Okay, so a good inference, it contains adequate information. The information that is taken from the source is done without bias. No assumptions are made about any of the situations that are presented to you. And it's a well-considered judgment from the evidence presented. So what I mean about bias or assumptions is that you can make an assumption about an individual or you can make an assumption about a city or a place, and that usually includes bias. So if you're biased against something, so if you are looking at an event, a situation, anything that has happened without bias, that's usually a good inference. So you're not using your personal judgments, your personal opinions, so to say the least, on how to look at whatever it is you're looking at. So it's a well-considered judgment from the evidence that's presented. So now you have bad inferences as well. And this is usually where a lot of people, individuals, fall into. So the evidence that is presented is often overlooked. So you're not taking all the evidence into account. Maybe you're looking at one piece or the other. It's just you're not being biased at all, but you're not taking all the information in, or sometimes you're avoiding it or leaving things out. And often includes bias, such as, but not limited to, stereotypes. So stereotypes are important to avoid, to recognize when you are stereotyping an individual or situation or place or anything really. I mean, there's no limit to stereotypes. Stereotypes have existed for a long time, and then we'll get into that. We'll get into why we're talking about stereotypes and such. Prejudice. It can be a prejudice against a person, place, thing, anything really. There's no end, there's no limit to prejudice, unfortunately. So as long as there's prejudice, there's always a way on how to look at that, and even how to market that as well. So we don't want to rely on prejudice for our inferences. Relying on prejudice or any stereotypes is a bad inference, and it's just often includes assumption. So you don't want to include the assumption. So that comes to my next point. Relies on assumptions before the final assessment is concluded. You don't want to rely on that. You don't want to assume before you know. That's a really bad inference. But unfortunately, what happens with this is that many advertisements tend to utilize this. So, you don't want to fall into that trap. So let's move on to understanding inferences. When considering a decision, make sure to look at that evidence carefully. You want to look at what's going on, and you don't want to really, make the assumption. Assumptions are bad. It can lead to fallacies, and this weakens the overall structure in the argument. Fallacies are kind of a way to not strengthen your argument, so to speak. Well, if you have a fallacy in there, then it just proves that your argument isn't as strong as you hold. And it's best to avoid preconceived ideas and look at the evidence and come to a reasonable understanding based on that evidence. So in the end, you just want to look at everything that's presented to you. You don't want to leave anything out, and you don't want to have any stereotypes, prejudice, any of that sort of judgment looked on you. You're trying to look at it as objective as possible, not subjective. So you want to avoid these fallacies. And there's two prominent fallacies that can be associated with assumptions utilizing bad inferences, but not limited to, are fallacies of division and fallacies of composition. Fallacies of division is when a claim is taken of the entire group, therefore the claim an individual part of that group is true as well. So I'll give you an example. You could say that a certain individual from a certain city acts a certain way, so therefore all people from that city are going to act like that, or hey, that person came from that school, look at him, he's acting that way, or just all that sort. That's a fallacy of division. Then we have a fallacy of composition. When a claim is taken of an individual part, therefore the claim of the group as a whole is true also. So you can look at a person, you're like, wow, this person is acting this way. I wonder if everybody from that place acts the same way, or wow, he comes from that city. They must all act like that from that city. They come from this country. It doesn't end. It doesn't end. So these are fallacies and you want to avoid them, but it's important to recognize them because these are utilized very effectively on how to advertise something to you. And not just necessarily on how to buy a product, but necessarily, to look at a way of life. So let's move on. And coming to this, we are going to classify some people. And I'm not going to use, real ethnicities or any of that sort. So yeah, let's look at some shapes. Yeah. So let's look at the triangle, the circle, and the square. So these are three types of people. And let's give these people some characteristics. Triangle's hardworking, circle's lazy, and the square is neutral. All right, let's give them some more characteristics. Let's go for triangle's non-committed, the circle is committed, and the square sways. All right, and let's give them at least one more character trait. Trouble with the law, low crime, and the square could be in between. So these are the characteristics for each shape, which are people. All right, so we have our sets of characteristics, and we know the triangles are a certain way, the circles are a certain way, and then that the squares are a certain way. All right, so you go into a neighborhood and there might be a lot of triangles or a lot of circles, a lot of squares. Or you might go into a store and you see, oh, triangles right there. Or you go to a restaurant, oh, little circles. Or you go to, I don't know, say you go to a fast food place, there's some squares. I mean, squares as in people, not squares as the insult. So which shape looks much more favorable compared to the others? Think about this. Which one out of these characteristics, and let's consider that these characteristics are just random. I just picked these at random. There's really no correlation as in, which one's going to be favorable or the other. But to individuals who are looking at this, to groups of people, there's going to be a classification as in which one looks more favorable to the other. And before you say, well, neither, well, let us put this to the test. Consider this. If each shape applied for a job and had the same qualifications and experience, which one would receive the job? I mean, really, think about this. Triangle goes in, applies, all right. Circle goes in, applies, and the square goes in, and they apply. Which one will receive the job? Which one's going to get the job in the end? So you're thinking, well, triangle, he's hardworking, but he's not really committed, and he's got some trouble with the law. Well, let's look at circle. He's lazy, but he's committed, and he doesn't have low crime. In the square, it's neutral, sways in between. I don't know, which one am I going to hire for the right job? It's up to me, and I gotta choose one or the other. What's it going to be? So, take some time, think about this, and then you can pause the video and then just think, write down in your notes, whatever you want to do, and then just yeah. All right, I'll give you some time. Hit pause now. Oh, you back? Okay. All right, so let's move on. All right, so with the classification of people, who did you select? The triangle, the circle, or the square? What was your reasoning behind this? Really, I'd like to know. Yeah, I don't know. You could hit in the comments or whatever. You could tell me. What was this? You could even write it in your notes and in your responses on what you thought was the correct choice. Because obviously you want to pick somebody, right? So, is there really a correct answer? Well, you really want to know? All right, let's do. All right, classification of people. It's important to remember the traits of the shapes. So, are the characteristics relevant to the individual or the preconceived ideas of the group those individuals belong to? So, it's important to ask, do those traits represent the individual or the group? So, was I looking at those traits as the individual triangle, the individual circle, and the individual square? Or was it just from the information that I gave without questioning anything? I was just giving that information. If you did question, good job. Give yourself a pat on the back, eat a cookie, drink a Mountain Dew and a Dr. Pepper, do all three. I don't know. It's all good. Celebrate. But if you didn't, in this case, it was the group. So we must disregard all of those characteristics and questions their individual traits, not the ones that belong to the group. We must look at the person as the individual for their individual traits, not the traits that are with the group. Remember the fallacies and the assumptions, fallacies of division and the fallacies of composition. That is important to understand when we're looking and relying on inferences. So how do all these inferences work? Why is it important to understand inferences? Because of the classification in general are the same types of classifications that apply to the way the world is seen. So if you start looking at individuals in that same way, then you're going to start applying it to your everyday life. People can then be compared based on the different characteristics that have been established through preconceived ideas. You're not really judging a person for their individual actions. You're just judging the person because of the history of what that individual has belonged to in the culture, group, religion, from which country, etc., from the city that they live in. I mean, yeah, it goes on pretty far. So the how and why did all of this begin? Why do we look at this? I mean, it's not necessarily human nature, of course not. So how could the comparison of human lives be connected to our own judgments? As in, we're like taking these groups of people and just grouping them into certain categories, not as an individual. This person's from this country, from this city, they're from that part of town, this part of town. It doesn't matter. There's they're all falling into the fallacies of composition and fallacies of division once you look at it. So let's take an understanding of why this is important. And it's because of advertisements. Advertisements prey on these fallacies, on the inferences, usually the bad inferences that people make, and they use it to take a product and sell it. I mean, advertisements are just information that's being pushed to sell a product or even sell a way of life, or maybe not even sell anything, just to promote some information. That's what an advertisement is. I mean, an advertisement in a sense is propaganda, but a lot of people don't like calling advertisements propaganda. But we'll get to that later in the semester. Marketing, public relations, that's all propaganda. But we like to call those commercials, marketing, and advertisements because it feels a lot safer. It's a euphemism to say the least. But how did this start? Well, if you could remember as a kid, you began seeing advertisements as a child. And as a kid, it's got to look a certain way. It's got to look a certain way in order for you to get attracted to that product and want that product. It's usually colors, usually the smell, usually something that you see on TV. You recognize those colors, you recognize those patterns, and you want that. You want to see it for what it is. And usually as a kid, it comes in a toy, you know, toy car, toy doll, action figure, some toy set. I don't know. Granted, a lot of kids aren't playing with a lot of physical toys, but there still are, there's still some kids that are playing with toys. A lot of them just rely on iPads and all that stuff. So, yeah, sad. But when I was a kid, and maybe when a lot of you are kids, you guys played with toys, toy cars, action figures and stuff. And when I was a kid, I liked playing with Matchbox cars and Hot Wheels and action figures like GI Joe and all that kind of stuff, Transformers, robots. And as a kid, I was attracted to the colors and the shapes, and I would see racing cars on TV, and I'd play with the racing cars. I'd see motorcycles, I'd see the robots, I'd see the cartoons, I'd see a bunch of stuff, and I'd make drawings of it, and it was toys. Toys was a good way to promote a product that you're selling. And also candy. What kid doesn't like candy? I mean, there are certain kids who don't like candy, but I mean, most kids, you offer them a piece of candy. It's like, hey, let's go get some candy, for your son or your daughter, your brother, your sister. And it's like, yeah, let's go get some candy, ice cream, food in general. You get your McDonald's Happy Meals, your kids' meals, and whatnot. You know, Now to this day, I still eat at fast food places, so they hooked me in, right? Well, that's one of the ways that it it starts. As a kid, you like certain candies, and you can hear your grandparents or your parents talk about candy that's not even made anymore. It's like, oh, back in my day, I remember we used to eat this candy or that candy. I remember there was tons of candy that I used to eat as a kid that I probably can't find now. I mean, I remember going and getting certain candy that was really delicious in different colors. Then as I got older, the candy started to fade and just started to come in different succinct colors that really didn't matter. So yeah, the bright colors in candy is almost like a throwback to my childhood, and that's another marketing ploy on advertisements, going towards nostalgia. But the point is that I remember all of this, and you probably remember things too from your childhood. And you remember the way that things are, and it shapes the way you see the world. The way you see the world as a kid, on what's nice, what isn't nice, what you like, what you don't like, you start forming these opinions on the world as a child very early in your life. What you like, what you don't like. Oh, give me some Skittles. No, I don't want Skittles. Give me some Starburst. Hey, I want that toy. I don't want that toy. Now kids are like, oh, let me get an iPhone. No, I want a Samsung. All these brands and such. They're just a way that you shape to see the world. I mean, Now we don't even have a Toys R Us in this town. But yeah, I remember there used to be another store called KB Toys. You know, hands up if anybody knows what a KB toy is. Well, it's a virtual environment, so just leave me something in the comments. That's okay. So, why is this important? Well, because as I mentioned, you carry this on as an adult. And when you want a product as an adult, you're kind of looking at it in a certain way, but also differently. Now your interests have shifted. Well, mine haven't. I still like toys and candy. But I mean, you know, I think everybody likes toys and candy. I mean, toys like, I like electronics and stuff. And, I still eat some candy now and then, gotta limit it, but candy. Well, anyways, the point is that I'm moving on, that you're looking at the way that the product, does it function? Does the food taste good? Do the clothes fit? Does the car work? Does the product actually function? As a kid, you may get the toy and you're happy and you're like, well, it doesn't do everything that I wanted. Okay, you throw it away. It's like, all right, let me go play with another toy. This one, you're more interested in because you are vested in this product. You really want it. I mean, usually the way that we're grown up and we've seen how, all of this works. Does the product function? And usually, sometimes there's endorsements. Does a certain celebrity have it? Does a certain athlete have it? Oh, I'm going to go buy those new shoes by that new guy that plays that new ball game. And, there's even a line of shoes that started out of a famous basketball player, Jordan. So, you know, there's a lot of shoes out there. There's a lot of products, clothing that, people want to buy. Oh, I want to buy those headphones. Nah, I don't think so. Oh, but so and so endorsed them. Oh, yeah, if he uses them, that's cool. Certain celebrity drives a car, certain athlete drives a car. I want to be like that person, usually, sometimes. And then we see it on TV, television, see it on commercials easily. Another euphemism for the word propaganda, but we'll get onto that later. Television with commercials. And on magazines, either print or online. Yeah, they still make print magazines. Just go down to your magazine aisle and, there's a bunch of advertisements in those magazines. Or before you check out at the grocery store, or, just hop on down to your local bookstore or even Barnes and Noble. I like going to bookstores. Bookstores are nice. Well, or there's online. And many of you may be more familiar with online work as well. So you're looking at a website and, most websites are run in the fashion of a magazine or periodical where you look at a certain page and, there you go. You have an advertisement there. Or you might even read a review for a product before you buy it. That's, the same type of advertisement that's given, is it good or is it bad? So what's necessary in order to obtain all these goods? As a kid, you just, in our culture, you would just ask your mom or your dad, hey, can I have this? And you usually say no. Or they would say, oh, you wait till your birthday or for Christmas or, this or that. Or, you just could have said, can I have that? Yes. They buy it for you. You're like, all right, are you happy? No. All right, let's go buy more. You happy? Yes. Okay, good. And then they'd leave you off. I mean, there's different methods on how to, obtain your goods as a kid, or you could have worked as a kid. You could have worked as a kid. I known some individuals who worked as children, and that's fine as well because they start learning different values and such. But now that's what you need, a job. In order to get all of those things you want, you need a job. And a job is necessary in order to live life. You want a place to live, get a job. You want a car, get a job. You want all those things. You want some McDonald's, get a job. Well, how am I going to afford McDonald's? We could work here at McDonald's. All right, I'm going to work at McDonald's and get McDonald's. Well, you know what I mean. If you get a job in order for you to get everything that you want. I know I keep coming back to food. Yeah, food's good. But, jobs are necessary in order for you to get the goods that you need. And, one important aspect that's relevant to jobs is that all jobs are moving at a fast pace with technology. Try to find any center of employment or any place that doesn't at least have an email, you probably won't find it. Try to find a place that doesn't have a website. Probably 80% of establishments have a website, at least a front page that tells you where things are, how to even get there. So technology is very important. If you're not moving up with the times of technology, then you get left behind, unless your job doesn't necessarily deal with important aspects of technology, but most jobs deal with technology. How do I reach you? Well, here's my cell phone number, here's my email. Technology is integral to any form of employment. So is education. And what I mean by this is not necessarily go to a 4-year school, get a degree, and then go get a job, because there's many forms of education. There's on-the-job training, there's trade schools, various different forms of education. Education just means that you're learning about the job. You can learn on the go. You can learn about carpentry, you can learn about cars, you can learn about other stuff. The point is that you're learning an education. If you're learning with it, using an educator. I'm losing my words here. You're utilizing what you know, and that's an education. And the more that you learn, the better qualified you are for that job, whatever it is, whatever job you want to go into. Skill sets are varied, but the more experience that you have, the better. And that's usually with education and experience. The more you learn, the more you know about a certain trade. And as with all jobs, you have negative sides to it. Number one, a lot of people might say just having a job, getting up at a certain hour, going to work, going to, man, I got to go to work. I mean, if you have that kind of job, I mean, and, find another job. But I mean, it's not that easy, really. I mean, it's not that easy. You're like, oh, I hate my job, because jobs don't just come here and there. It's difficult to try to find a job, especially one that you love. And sometimes as a young person, or somebody who's struggling financially, you just got to take what you get. And that's unfortunate aspect to this life, but we'll get to that in a little bit. We'll get to that later. So there's negatives, and you just got to grit your teeth and just go, all right, just gotta go through this. I don't like this. And you could take a moment and just reflect on the many ways that you do not like your current job. And if you don't have a job, then try to get one. And I know, and especially right now with everything that's going on, a lot of people losing jobs and such. So it's difficult and it's hard. And some people would like a job, and some people really enjoy their job. You go in, you're like, yeah, all right, yeah, another day to conquer. Yes, all right. I just love coming into my job. And yeah, one of those individuals. I love teaching. I love teaching people how to write, how to read, how to critically think. So yeah, I like my job. So hopefully you have a job that you like as well. And if you don't, then just keep plugging away and looking out there. So this is what it means, especially when we're relating to this as a whole. With advertisements, you find a job in order to buy what you need, buy what you want. And most of these places are fast growing industries, excuse me. And fast growing industries are called corporations. Corporations are everywhere. You go pump gas, that's a corporation. You go buy food, it's probably from a corporation. Corporations are giant entities that have multiple stores, multiple interests all around the world that distribute the resources for a good and for a price. And this is in correlation to us as consumers, because we may have jobs and we are consumers as well, because we want the toys, the candy, we want the products that function well. And this is due to having a choice in a free market. I'll use that term very loosely. And there's a large population that's growing and growing and growing. So it's up to us to go out, find a job, and get the things that we want. And as long as we have that job, we think, oh, we're safe, we're happy. But you notice there's one guy at the end, he's not happy. So, if you're happy, you're paying your bills. Well, maybe you're not happy when you're paying your bills, but I don't know, you're buying something that you like, you're living under a roof, you're driving your car, you're blasting your music, and you're just driving and like carefree in the world. Or I mean, maybe you got responsibilities, but that means at least you're happy that you have a job, right? But it could be at the very end, you're like, hey, wait a minute, what's this all about? Why am I not happy? What's going on? I mean, maybe that person at the end doesn't have a job. Maybe that person at the end doesn't like his job. Or maybe he just sees something differently. But it's important to understand that there are more of them. There are more of them that are not happy. And you could probably understand yourself that there are individuals now who are not as happy. So, what does this mean? What does this mean? And how does this all relate to advertisements? Well, they are selling you not only the product, but a way of life on how you should live your life according to the set standards and beliefs. So, is this a community where everybody's happy? Or is this conformity? Does this lead to isolation by individuals that cannot conform or fit into the community? What's going on here? Because if this was the ideal life, then I guess everybody would be happy. But of course, not everybody is happy. So, what is this related back to advertisements? So, do they influence public opinion? Or is public opinion influence advertisements? Which one is it? Let's think about this for a second. Advertisements influence public opinion. So you could say that, well, I look at an advertisement for a phone and I'm going to go buy that phone. Or wait a minute, people on the other end of that argument say, well, people already wanted a product, so we're just letting them know that that product is out there. And it goes for anything, for that phone or for a car, for food, or even a sale. But it's the popular choice that sways either one. And it's cyclical. They both depend on each other. So it's not that one is for the other, it's that they're both coexist. It's almost like the chicken and the egg concept. What came first, the chicken or the egg? But in this case, if no phone existed, there would be no need for it because people would not know about this invention. And I'm not saying a cell phone where people had phones. I'm talking about days before there was even phones or any form of communication. How could you want a product you don't know about? So once you know about that product, of course, there's going to be feedback on which product those groups of individuals want. And that feedback generates to the marketing firms and strategies and such. And which one is going to be sold or bought, which product you don't need, which product is replaced, which product is thrown away, which one is the best, which one is the worst. So why does this matter? It comes down to success and failure. And what I mean by that is that these two terms are very, very, very subjective. And the definitions of them for our culture have a certain set of criteria. on what we consider success and what we consider failure. So the public opinion's definition of success, and remember, opinions are subjective: wealthy, stability, healthy, independent. Usually you could afford name brands like, with tech, any merchandise, any goods really. It's like I'm gonna buy a certain laptop, I'm gonna buy a MacBook, go buy my Lamborghini, and go eat at the best restaurant in town. I'll throw it at it. Go live in Monaco, where buy an apartment for like $17 million. Yeah, that's the life. But go be neighbors with an F1 driver. And reliability. Are you reliable? So this is usually what people think of when you're a success in life. You have money, you're stable, you're healthy, you don't depend on anybody, you can afford all the name brands, and you're reliable. That's usually what people think of as a success. And you may have your own definition of success, but just talk to anybody on the street, anybody who's not taking this class, and somebody who's taking this class. I don't know, message each other. That's fine. Or, leave it on the comments, whatever you want to do. And just say, well, what is the definition of success? What is your definition of success? And it could be very different. I know mine is. These aren't my definitions. I know I have mine, and mine are based off of my own opinions as well. But this is usually somebody's definition of success according to the culture and society that we have been brought up in. And then we'll get more into that later. We'll get more into that as in why this happens. So let's look at the public opinion's definition of failure. As you can see, probably failure is going to be the opposite, right? Poverty, you're unstable, not healthy, you're dependent on somebody, and you can't afford name brands such as used items, you're off-brand brands that, are just the knockoffs, and, discount stores. Usually a lot of, you get, there's a lot of people that get flack for going into discount stores, and, it's not good, but, that's purely based off opinion. And when I'm talking about used items, not necessarily used items or antiques. I'm gonna go buy an antique. No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about when you're buying a car that's used and it's barely running. And we'll get to vehicles in a little bit. So, and you're not reliable. You're not reliable on how you're living your life. So these are just some of the different characteristics of a success and failure from the public's opinion of definition and failure. And you just ask people, and usually that's what it's seen. And it's seen in TV, it's seen in television shows, it's seen on movies. You could go on Netflix and you automatically see the person who's a successful person in that show, who's the successful person in that movie, who's the failure. How are they advertising this? Because I'm telling you, it's not necessarily how you're advertising a product, but how you're advertising the way of life in order for you to buy those products or earn enough to get those products. So let us move on to a perfect example. So let us look at option one. Which is more preferable? Option one or option two? This car? Yeah. Or option two? The Lambo or the sedan? And that's an Lamborghini Aventador Superveloce. And then there's the sedan, which I can't identify. It looks like a Toyota with the different front, with the different quarter panel. So, which one is more preferable? Which one would you choose? The Lamborghini Aventador or the sedan. And I'm driving a sedan right now, and I'll tell you that probably my car looks more closely to what the sedan is. Lamborghini is nice, but why is it nice? Why? Why are we looking at that Lamborghini and putting a value of high price? Let me tell you a little history about Lamborghini. Lamborghini originally made tractors. They made tractors to work on their farm. And then they started making vehicles. And let me tell you, those tractors are worth a lot. Why would we place a lot of value? Well, because number one, the Lamborghini name. Lamborghini was back in their farm was made by hand. Every piece of that vehicle was made by hand. The Diablo, the Countach, they were all made by hand on the Lamborghini farm, which is pretty nice. So when you're making something by hand, as opposed to a factory line, then you could put that value on it because you put more time and effort into crafting something by hand. And once you have that name and that reputation, then you could focus on putting a price on that. And especially if individuals with a lot of money are driving around in your vehicle and you're like, oh, you can own it. It becomes a symbol of status. And is that really that's important as opposed to the sedan? Oh, let me tell you, there's a lot of sedans that are really expensive as well. But we're talking about this type of sedan, the sedan that is reliable, it gets you places, but it doesn't quite have that same look and that same feel as the Lamborghini. I mean, as my brother would always say, you drive up in a Lamborghini or any sports car, or you drive up in a beat up sedan, who's going to look more successful? That's what we were discussing here on the way that advertisements work, on the way that advertisements are trying to sell you that product. Because it's not necessarily the product that they're trying to sell you, it's the way of life. I think that's what a lot of Ferrari owners say, a lot of Porsche owners, that, oh, you're not just buying the car, you're buying the way of life. And that way of life comes with a high cost of maintenance and repairs to that car. Like, oh, I bought the car, well, I got to change the spark plugs, and it's like so much money, or even the tires are probably worth as much as what you could buy a used car on a lot. You're like, oh man. And you're like, well, time to put this baby on Craigslist, see who buys it. No. I mean, obviously, if you can afford that car, I mean, it's a huge responsibility and a huge investment. But that's exactly what we're coming down to in the understanding of the advertisements, as in you buy a product, you have that product itself becomes the advertisement. When you drive around, when you walk around with those, when you drive around with the car, when you walk around with those clothes, when you show that product and the public sees it, you automatically set yourself apart from individuals who don't have that. And with advertisements, they're trying to sell you that. They're trying to sell you how you're going to see yourself as a success or a failure. But how do we come to that? How exactly is that? We'll get more into that later as we go. But let's take this understanding, because it's my choice, isn't it? Or I could read it. It's my choice, isn't it? I don't know. The belief that one is clearly better. So you saw from the two pictures versus the Lamborghini Aventador versus that Toyota. I don't know if it looked like a Toyota. I'll just call it the sedan. The belief that one is clearly, quote unquote, better. So this is all due to the values that are placed in our society on what's successful and what's a failure. Somebody sees you driving a Lamborghini, you're like, oh, clearly a success. Or maybe he borrowed it from his friend. I don't know. Or his friends in high places. I don't know. Whatever you want to say. You drive a Lamborghini, people are going to ask you questions. People are going to start taking pictures of your car, no matter what. Are people going to take pictures of your sedan? No, unless you hit their car, then maybe they'll take pictures. But no, it's not going to be it. or if you're famous and you're driving a sedan, but we'll get to that later in that understanding. Society deems it much better. Why does society deem it much better? Well, just in the way that it's marketed and the way that you see it. It all starts on the way that you see things as a kid. Raise our hands or leave a comment or such, or you put it in your notes that you probably had something in your childhood that you always wanted until now. Could be a Lamborghini, could be a Ferrari, could be a set of clothes, maybe it could even be a way of life. You wanted that house, you wanted to go to a place, you wanted to go to visit somewhere. On how society deems it much better, and it starts when you're a kid, when you're a child, on the way that you look at the world. Therefore, that choice to you is the ideal choice, and therefore it's also approved by society. As in, this is a choice, this is what you need to be, versus a success or a failure. But all values are subjective on which they're placed on goods. They're all subjective. They're all subjective. Cost, value, on worth. I mean, in theory, you could produce something and give it away, as in a gifting economy. And this is not an economic class, so we'll not get into like different economies and such. But you could gift it away. You could make something with that of your own bare hands, and you give it, to a friend. When you were a kid, when I was a kid, for Mother's Day or my mom's birthday or my dad's birthday or Father's Day, I used to make drawings for my parents, or make stuff out of cardboard and draw it with the Crayolas and all that stuff. I'd make stuff out of out of my own hands, and then I'd give it to my parents, and my parents would keep it. And it made me feel happy, and it made my parents feel happy. Well, I was a kid, I couldn't buy them necessarily what they needed or such, but now that I'm older, give them a card and whatever their heart's desire to a limit, and you know they want a round trip around the world. Like, well, I can't afford that now, but someday I will. I could always give them something from the heart, and that's the value that you get, that you could place on that. You're giving a friend or parent or your wife or your daughter, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whoever, you know, you're giving that, and that's the value that you place. But that there could also be a monetary value, and both of those are subjective. They're subjective on how that good is placed. And the more that the people agree on this value, then that value gets determined on how those inferences are seen by the individuals for the cost, the value, and the worth. It's just always that saying, best things in life are free. Well, a lot of people like free stuff. A lot of people don't like giving it away. So, wouldn't that be nice? Just living in an ideal world where everything is free. Well, all right, let's move on. So, these values are then used to judge individuals. So, this is us. It's used back on us. How? Well, what do you mean? In part, determined by how the choices were advertised. Just as in they're selling you a product, they're selling you that way of life. How that choice was advertised, how that choice was presented to you. Our value is determined by the same subjectivity as well. Our own human life is determined by the same way as well, on how much we value, how much we're worth. Just think about it. How many of you apply for jobs and you haven't got those jobs? You didn't have the right experience, you didn't have the right qualifications. Same subjectivity, the same values are being placed on us on how we are looked at in the world. Because in the end, we become the product to buy and sell. And as you know, with products that are no longer around, As I was mentioning earlier, products are always replaceable. So, did we have a choice at all when we were living this life? Something to think about. Hope you enjoyed this lesson on advertisements. And yeah, tune in for the next one if you want another one. So, hope you like this lecture and take care, everyone.